Okay, so we're going to get started for today. Welcome to the last 2 official weeks of class. Panic now, right? Such is life. Hopefully you're not panicking in this class. We're trying not to do that. Somehow spring semester always seems to drag on. So the fact that there's 2 weeks left, I don't know. Maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But anyway, we're gonna pack the last 2 weeks with lots of good stuff for you. So today we're gonna work on getting some plans out of the world of SketchUp. And so last week we did the elevations out of SketchUp. Then we spent a day working on your portfolio and kind of generally getting caught up for class. Today we're gonna work through plans. On Wednesday we'll do sections of your building, and then next Monday, a week from today, we'll do perspectives. And then we'll talk about your portfolios, and then you'll meet on the Monday after that and turn in your portfolios and eat some donuts. Sounds like a good plan, right? So today we're going to work through how to create a plan. And so I'm using the same model that I've been using, same model that I did the building elevation on. And we're going to go ahead and create a plan from this as well. And so to do a plan, we're going to end up using the section tool that's built into SketchUp. The key here is that we're not using it as a section. We're instead turning it so that it's horizontal and cutting a plan. The nature of a plan, if we're drawing it, is essentially a horizontal section in the world of architecture. What we do is we take a plan view of the building that's about 4 feet off the ground. Does anybody know why we cut it at about 4 feet? Ideas? No ideas? None of you know? They didn't tell you this in 120? You forgot. You're all in architecture school. You should know these things. Okay, so we cut a floor plan at 4 feet above the ground, which is right about here, because it cuts through the windows. Right? If we cut a floor plan too low to the ground, it wouldn't necessarily cut through the windows. It cuts through the doors. It's not too tall to show where the doors are. And it's above the kitchen cabinets. Okay, so it's above your lower kitchen cabinets. So when we draw a floor plan, which you all did, right, you drew in where the cabinets were, where the sink was, where the toilet was, all those kinds of things. And that's because we're cutting the building at that level. So when we go to do a plan of our SketchUp model, we need to establish where this 4-foot line is. And it doesn't have to be exactly 4 feet. It should be somewhere around 4 feet. Generally, 4 feet is the convention of it. And so I need some kind of a guide that's going to help me figure out where 4 feet is. And it's a little bit complicated because I've built my building such that I have some foundation below my building here. And so what I'll do is I'll start with just a basic square that's in front of my building. I'll use the push-pull tool, and I'll get that even with my building itself. So you guys see how that's essentially the thickness of the foundation right now. Okay? Then I'll use my push-pull tool again, and I will type in 4 feet. And so now I have a little rectangle there that's 4 feet above where my finished floor would be. Does that kind of make sense how I got there? Okay? This little piece doesn't have to be right next to your building. In this case, I ended up making it right next to my building. That's fine. I'll go ahead and delete it after I use it to create my section. So the next piece of this puzzle is we're going to use something called the section plane tool in SketchUp. It's available in the large tool set. So if you're not seeing the large tool set, go to your window, or excuse me, tools, view toolbars, and make sure you check the box for large tool set. Once that box is checked, you'll see this panel on the left side here. And at the very bottom right corner, there's something that looks like a little section marker. If you're used to or if you're in the working drawings class and you've seen that marker before, it's the section marker. I'll go ahead and click on it, and what I get is this gold plane. And by default, it's looking down, which is fine. If I were to move on to one of my faces of the building, we'd see that it's changing its orientation, and it would cut a section at those variety of orientations. What I want to do is I want to move so that I'm right on top of that box that I just created, and I'm going to snap to the top of that box. So I'll go ahead and snap to the top of that box. Oops. Sorry, didn't snap to the top of the box. Let's try that one more time. There we go. And when I do that, we can see that I'm looking through my building at that 4 feet off the ground. So if I had modeled in my kitchen cabinets or beds or any of that kind of stuff, it would show up here, right? My guess is that it will show up for you guys, but I haven't drawn that in. So now that I have this section plane at the right view, I'm going to switch my view, or my camera, into the standard view's top. And when I go to the standard view's top, I now am looking at it as if it were a plan, but it's still in perspective. See how I see the edge of these walls going down on either side? They're receding. I need to switch my view, or excuse me, it's my camera, into parallel projection. And we did this for the elevation view. Once I've done that, I look very nicely like a building plan, right? Very much like what you drew in AutoCAD. Now, we used to have a tool where we could select the section plane and then right-click on it, and there would be a plug-in that said Add Section Cut Face, which fills in what we've cut through. When they upgraded to 2016, that wasn't installed, so I don't have a way of doing it. At least on my machine, it doesn't work. If you guys right-click and see it, you're more than welcome to try it. But for me, we're going to have to pass on it, do the post-processing of it in Photoshop rather than do it with the actual section cut face plug-in. So let me zoom back in. And once I'm zoomed in to look at my building, I'm going to go through the same process that we've been doing with my exports. But there's a couple things that are really important when you're dealing with exporting this essentially plan/section view. And that is that there's something called the section plane, which is this giant object here that's slicing my building. And you see how, well, on the projector you can't really see it. On your screen you'll see it, that it's slightly gray versus the plain white of the background. So I need to make sure that I turn this off. I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to uncheck Section Planes. And it's going to turn that section plane off. I can't see it anymore, but it also makes it so that it's not that light gray. When we do the Photoshop post-processing, if you leave it on, it will make the background progressively darker. And you won't want that when you layer them together and use the multiply. So now that that's done, let me zoom in like this. I could actually get rid of that box that I had drawn as a guide. I don't need it anymore. All right. So here we are. I'm going to turn off my guides. I'm going to turn off my axes. And now I'm seeing just the plan. Now remember, just as before, we want to save this scene so we can come back to it and re-export if we don't like how it turned out or something like that. So I'm going to go and open up my scenes window here, right here. And I'm going to click on the plus sign. And there we go. I'm going to go ahead and create the scene. And I can rename this scene. Call it floor plan. There it is. And the advantage here is that I can come back to that view over and over again and do my export again, should I need to. OK, so that's been done. I'm going to go ahead and go, and once again, I'm already on, under Styles, I'm already on the Hidden Line style, which is available under the Default Styles Hidden Line. Right? Let me go ahead and again turn off the guides and the axes. There we go. And now I'll go ahead and do my first export. So I'll go to File, Export 2D Graphic. And we're going to save this into today's folder. Oops, it's 128 today. And let me create a folder for today. And I'm going to call this Lines. And maybe I'll add Plan and then Lines. And I'll go ahead and go to Options. And it's still the default from last time, but you should double check because on your computers they're locked, and you can end up having to reset this. It's 4,000 in width. That's fine. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I'll click on Export, and I'll get my first export. Right? This is exactly the same process that we've done before, so we're going to keep going through this. Next thing, I'm going to go to the Edit menu here. I'm going to turn on X-ray. My guess is that X-ray isn't going to do anything, though, because I don't actually have the roof of the building or anything there. So we'll go ahead and ignore that for right now. Now, the next part is a little bit tricky. Okay? And that's when I turn on the shadows. So let me go to View, Shadows. We see the shadows here. But notice that the shadows are getting cut off because my building isn't whole. Right? And that's one of the quirks and problems with SketchUp whenever we do something like this, is that we end up with shadows that really aren't that great. We're going to kind of work our way around that, and I'll show you how I do that in just a second. But I would like to take this opportunity to point out that this is one thing that we can do differently in Rhino versus SketchUp. When we do Rhino and V-Ray, we can actually take sections that account for the whole building, even though part of the building is visibly gone. So I like to point that out. So what we need to do is we need to go to View, and we need to turn off the section cuts, which lets us look at the top of our building and see the whole shadow for the building. Okay? Now, in my particular building, I don't really have any overhangs, so it makes my life rather easy. For you guys, you may have some overhangs, and we'll deal with that in post-processing. I do, however, want to make sure that all of my shadows fit within the context. Let's do something about like that. I get some nice little pops right in there. That looks reasonable, and they all fit within the view that I have. Okay? So let me go back to my, under Edit, I'm going to go to the Edge Settings. I'm going to turn off edges so that I have just the shadows. And I'll go ahead and go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And we will call this Shadows. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. So now I have the shadows done. All right, so we'll continue on. Let me go back to my View menu. We'll turn back on my section cuts so that we can see through the building again. We'll turn off the shadows so that we're looking here once again. And I'm going to turn back on the edges. And then we'll look at some of the sketchier edge tools. So let me go into Sketchy Edges under Styles. And we'll start with the Airbrush with Endpoints. Now notice that when I did that, the screen got a little darker. That's because the section plane showed up again. So I want to turn back off the section plane and turn off the guides. And then I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is the Airbrush. And again, you're welcome to pick any view, any style that you want. This is just one that I've had success with. And I'll also do the same for the pen gray. So we'll come down here. There it is. Let me once again go to View and make sure I turn off section planes so that I don't have that. And then I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is my pen gray. And I'll go ahead and click on Export again. Okay, so now I have those views, and it's time to bring them into Photoshop. So I'll jump ship over into Photoshop, which I already have open. And I'll go ahead and go to File, and then Open. And I'll open that first one. So let's drop back here into today's folder. And I'm going to open up the lines first. There it is. And I'll go to File and then Place, and we'll drop in the other views as well. So let's put the shadows in. Let's go to File and then Place. And we'll put the pen gray in. And we'll go to File and then Place. And we'll put the airbrush in. So this should start to feel very routine by now, right? We've done it 3 times. It should start feeling that way. That's the idea. Let me rename these layers to be consistent with them. So this one is Airbrush. This one is the pen gray. Remember, when you start to have too many layers, it's always helpful to have them labeled for you. This is shadows. Okay, I'm also going to take each of these and change them into a multiply blending mode. And there we are, we're seeing through this particular building. Now I have some issues, and we're going to start, let me turn off the airbrush and the pen gray. We're going to start with shadows first. And so if I'm looking at this particular view, right, the way my building works, I have a problem because this should be shadow right in there. Likewise, that should be shadow right in there. So I need to make that correction. And you guys may have the same problem happening with your overhangs, where you might have little places that aren't fully covered up. So I need to go ahead and I need to fill this in with that grayish color. So I'm going to zoom in here. So we're looking a little closer. Might be one too many. Right there. And I'm going to go ahead and use my select tool, my polygonal lasso, and I'm going to draw a box underneath these black lines. And one of the great things about multiply layers is as long as we're underneath the black, we're not going to make anything stand out as too dark. So I've selected that region. Okay? Now I need to paint this region with that color. So I can click on the paintbrush tool, which is fine. Let me get onto the shadows layer. Oh, it's going to make me rasterize the shadows. So let me right click and say rasterize layer. Now I can work on the shadows. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to copy this exact color of gray. So to do that, I'm going to use this little eyedropper tool. And when I click on the eyedropper tool and I click on this color, you see that my foreground color changes to match. Okay, so now I have the exact color of this gray right there. And I'll use my brush and we'll paint this in. Like that. So now that piece has been painted in. Right? Now, right up here, we need to correct the shadow there. This is just a rectangle, so we'll use the rectangular marquee tool to select this. Makes our life a little bit easier. Right there like that. Once again, I'll use the eyedropper to make sure I get this exact shade of gray. We'll use the paintbrush, and we'll paint this in as well. Okay, so that's been painted in. So that looks pretty good. Now, underneath this little overhang, once again, I have part of a shadow. And so this one gets a little bit trickier because I have to interpret where the shadow would be. Okay? Thus far, these other pieces were easy. We just filled them in. But here, we have to kind of think about where the shadow is going to go. So the first piece, right, would be to connect from right here at this edge up into that little bit. And we're going to fill in that triangle. And you could do each of these as a separate little painting, or we could continue and do the whole thing here. So the other part of that is I need to connect from right there to right here, because that's casting a shadow. So I'm going to hold down Shift to add to the selection. We'll go right there from this edge, and we'll go up till we line up there. And one of the tricks here that I know that I'm doing the diagonal from the right point is when I overlap the existing piece of the shadow, you see how the angle's the same? If I had started instead, here, hold on a second, if I had started instead maybe with this corner, and I went up here, see how the angles don't match? Right? It's a very good sign that I'm not at the right place. So let's try that again. Oops. Let's see here. All right. I'm going to go from this corner. I'll hold down Shift to start. We'll come up. Those match up quite nicely. We'll come across here. We'll come down to this corner. We'll come over right there. Come up. We'll come over. And now I've made that selection. So I have this little piece to fill in, and I have this piece to fill in. Once again, I'll use the eyedropper tool to pick this shade of gray. We'll use the paintbrush tool, and we'll fill that in, and we'll fill that in as well. Okay? Now it looks like there's a little bit of shadow that's being cast by my building that overlaps this little corner. So we do need to correct that as well. So let me do a little rectangular marquee. Once again, eyedropper, pick the color, and we'll fill that little piece in as well. Oops. So let me zoom out and take a look at my shadows. So that looks good. Notice the grays are slightly different shades, right, which is part of the challenge, and part of why I always choose to select things. Now, right here, if we look at it, right, this is inside my building, and it's being cast by the roof that's above. But I don't want that piece of shadow, so we need to get rid of that piece of shadow. So let me go ahead and I'll use the rectangular marquee, and we'll slice off that piece of shadow. So now that goes away. But it also means that we have to add in a little bit of shadow right here. So when you have shadow going this way, it's easiest to start, I don't know where the point is over here, so it's easiest to start somewhere along the shadow and continue a line that aligns with the existing shadow. Right about like that. I need to figure out where I started here. There. And I'll go ahead and use the paintbrush, but again, I want to sample from here. We use the paintbrush, and we'll fill that piece in. Okay, so we've solved the shadow there. Now let's come over to this set of stairs. Okay, so now this starts to get a little bit complicated because I have to fill in the shadow, but I have to match this angle right there down here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a very small selection that goes along this edge. Like that. And then I need to move that selection. Okay? Now, I'm not excited if I go inside. See how I get those scissors? I don't want the scissors because the scissors will cut this piece out. Instead, I want to be outside. Oops. Let me get on a layer that's blank. I need just a blank layer. No, that's fine. So that I can move that selection. Okay, so let's move that selection down right there to that edge, because that's what's casting the shadow. And now I can go ahead and we can start, again with the polygonal lasso. I'm going to hold down Shift. We'll go from this corner, and I can use that little selection as a guide to get my angle correct. So it should be about like that. We'll come up here and across, and we'll come back down to there. Okay, so I have that. I don't need this piece of the selection anymore, so I'm going to use my polygonal lasso, but this time I'm going to hold down Alt, which is subtract from, and we're going to subtract off that part of the selection. Looks like I'm off ever so slightly. I'm going to add a little bit more to the selection right from the corner there. And again, I just want to make sure that I'm nice and parallel. And I'll come back and finish it there. Okay? So I've used that angle to match over here. So once again, I'll use an eyedropper, copy the color, and we'll fill this in as well, like that. Now, this went on top of that layer because I drew it on that new layer instead of the shadows layer. So let me back up one step or two steps. Let me change to the shadows layer, and then I can fill it in like this. All right? And it looks like it changed my color of those stairs. That's how SketchUp did the shadowing. I want it all to be consistent, so let me go ahead and just select this region right there. And let me go ahead and paste that or paint that in as well so that they're all nice and consistent like that. Okay, so let me go ahead and press Control 0 so we can see everything. And now if I look at the shadow as a whole, I've solved the shadow problem. All the shadows are fixed. It looks like it should look as part of my scene. So that's good. So I can take it one step further with the shadows, and I can do a dodge and burn layer so that I can selectively darken and lighten the shadows a little bit. But I'm going to hold off on doing that for right now until we get some of our background imagery in, because I don't really know what I want it to look like yet, or how dark I want the shadows, or how light I want the shadows. So we're going to leave it the way it is for right now and continue moving on. So the next piece is I need to go find some background imagery and or some textures to work with this particular scene. So let me go ahead and go to File and Place, and I'll have to find an image. And I haven't found that yet. So let me go back to my Creative Commons search, which is up here. Oh, by the way, I should point out that all of everything that I'm saying is right here under Assembly 10.6, which is under the tutorials, and then Assemblies. And it'll walk you through step by step everything that I'm doing. We just got through the changing the shadows, and then this gets into the background texture and stuff. Okay, so it's all there. It's all written up for step by step instructions of what I'm going through. So I need to find a background image. So let's go to the Creative Commons search. And this is probably, of all the images to find, to collage with, this is probably one of the most challenging ones to find, because it has to be about the right scale, and it has to be in plan view, which is difficult to find. So we have a couple challenges with finding that particular happy medium. Right? It has to be far enough off the ground to show the ground and be in relatively parallel projection, and at the same time it can't be like satellite imagery, which is too far away and too blurry. So one of the things that I used to always search for was kite aerial photography, or CAP, because photos taken from kites are just about the right distance from the ground. Things have changed a bit in the world of technology. Now there's a proliferation of drones that are out there, and so you might be able to search for drone or drone photography and get a similar kind of height range. And actually, I've never searched for drones, so let's try that one. Drone photo meadow. And let's see what we can get. Well, we got a whole lot of nothing, so that didn't help. I'm going to try KAP, all capitals, meadow, and see if we can get something there. I'm striking out, right? Oh. I swear I've done this search before and I found stuff. See, something like this is certainly a nice view, but it's not looking straight down. So that's not going to work. We have to keep looking for something that's straight down. Something like this, and you can see why the scale is about right. This is a beach, and that's about right for a plan, right? It's unfortunately not what we're looking for, right? So we have to keep scrolling here. Tell you what, let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see the images better. Right, that one unfortunately is blurry. So that one's not really going to work. And so, as I said, this is one of the more challenging ones to try to find the right image. So as you come across them, I'd recommend just opening links in new tabs as you go forward. And eventually, we should find something that should work. There's in the world of kite photography, there is always a proliferation of beaches because of the strong winds on a beach. So people really like doing this on a beach. So it's a little bit challenging because we're trying to do it in a forest. There's a distinct challenge to flying a kite in the middle of a forest, i.e. there's trees in the way. But we're working on it. That one can work. We can also do some skewing of the images after the fact. If they're not quite in perspective but they're close, we can make some adjustments. Okay, so I have a few that are open, and I'm going to see if I can make any of these work for me. Something like this is pretty generic and will probably work fine. So let's go ahead and download that one. And let me show it in the folder. There it is. Let me copy it over to the flash drive. I'm going to try a few images because you never know which one's really the right view. Let me go ahead and drop it into today's folder. And let's see what else we have. Okay, that one might work as well. It's a little bit farm-like, but it might work. So let's go ahead and download that one. It's pretty small in size. We're going to skip that one. Okay, this one might be okay. It's a little blurry. See the size. Size is decent. Yeah, I mean, the image that I'm going from is a 4,000 pixel image, so this is probably going to be a little bit blurry long term, but we'll make it work. All right. In an ideal world, you take your drone to the site and you take your photos of your plan. That one's too blurry. Don't like that one. That one's got too many strings in the way. And I'm going to do this one just to see if I can skew it to make it look right. It's kind of a personal challenge. So let's take this one. You show in the folder. Copy it, and we'll paste it. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and go back into the world of Photoshop. And as I said, I'm going to pick this kind of complicated one because I'm just kind of curious if I can do it and make it match up. So there it is. It's one of the other challenges with this particular photo is I don't exactly have the best spot to put my building. Right? We'll shoot to maybe put the building in here. But I have to pay a little of attention to what are the shadows doing in this particular image. So the shadows in my image are going up and to the right. So the shadows in this image are going down and to the right. So I'm going to, before I get too far along, I'm going to rotate this so that the shadows match up. And I might do it about like that. Okay? Then we'll zoom out a little bit. And I need to make this bigger. So we'll make it bigger. All right, this is kind of my best shot at dropping in there. Kind of like having that. Maybe we'll cut out some of the trees. Maybe like that. And I'm also going to go in and I'm going to skew this image to correct for some of the distortion because it wasn't a true straight down view. Okay? So what I'll do, and I probably should, let me show you this part first because it'll be easier for you to see it. Go to File and then Place. Let me drop that one in again. And let's make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Okay. So if I look at this particular image, I'm looking kind of down at it. And the receding lines would be going off this way. So I'm going to go into Edit, Transform, Skew. And I'm going to take each of these sides out like this to flatten off the image. And so I've taken away the perspective view of this. And I've distorted it down so that it's more of a top view. Does that kind of make sense for how I tweak that? Okay. So now that I have that tweaked, then we'll go ahead and say, OK, I'll press Control minus, and then we need to do our rotation. So let me go back into Edit, Free Transform. Let's rotate this so that my shadows match up. about like that. And then we'll make this large enough. Oops. Okay, we're going to give it a go again and see if the recording will hang tight. So I really wasn't happy with how this one was turning out, this one here. It just wasn't quite the right look. So I went ahead and I brought in one of the other ones that I downloaded. And this is where I was telling you sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you have to kind of play around with it. This is a little bit more generic as a background texture. I can lighten it up and it'll end up looking fine. So now that I have that, let me move it to the bottom of my stack here. And I can actually move it. Let me turn this off for just a second. Let me turn off the shadows. And I'll do just like we did before. I'll use the magic wand to select everything outside of my building. Obviously, if you had a courtyard or something inside, you'd have to select that as well. Then I'll go to the layer here with the background, and I'll click on the Add Layer Mask, which will cut out my building. Then when I turn on the shadows, right, the shadows are still being cast onto the ground of the building as well. So it's looking pretty good. I think I want to punch out the walls a little bit more. So I'm going to work, let me zoom in here. I'm going to use my magic wand tool and I'm going to select the walls. And it will take a little bit longer for the areas. I'm missing a few of my doors and windows, but you'll still get the idea. I'm going to select those and then I'm going to darken them up. So I'll work on my layer 1, which is that temporary layer that I was using before. I'll use the paint tool, and let's paint in kind of a nice dark gray here. And we'll go ahead and paint to darken up my walls. Right, something like that. And that just helps them stand out just a little bit more. I do want to change this layer to be on multiply so that my lines shine through. And there's a few places where I missed windows and doors and that sort of thing. Remember, I can always go back and I can cut those out again. If I wanted to say put a window right here, right, we could go back onto that layer. I could press delete, and that would then cut out the window. So the point is that I can go back and I can make corrections for things that I may have missed in the original export, and that will then look a lot like what a window should look like right there. Okay, so I now have that part placed in and dealt with. I have my pen gray and my airbrush, which I can turn on. I may need to multiply a little bit to casual that up a bit, but now it's time to start looking at, this is a pretty stark site right now. And it would probably be good to at least add a few trees, maybe add some people, some way of activating this as a plan. And so let me go ahead and we'll do a tree as an example. I'll show you the tree, but the process would be the same for something else. So let me go ahead and open up. Apparently I closed my window here. The Creative Commons search. And let me look for a tree. Tree top view, maybe. Right, I want something where I can look down on a tree. Something like this is going to be fantastic as a shadow, which is something I may do. But I need a little bit more of like this kind of a tree, maybe. I'll open that now. Let's see here. Let's try, let me go back to cap again. And I want a tree from the top. again, this is on the challenging side because people tend not to fly kites around trees. Try drone. Ooh, that's a nice image. That could have worked nicely. Ah, there we go. Sometimes you just need the right, you have to keep searching until you find something, right? This image is probably the best that I've seen right there because we're seeing all the trees, which was kind of what I was after as part of the plan view. So let me back up a step, and I'm going to drop my building right here because I ended up liking this one better. So let's go ahead and download that one. Copy it. And let me put it in to my folder. There. Let me go back to Photoshop, and it kind of solves more than one thing at once here. Let me go to File and then Place. Let's drop this image in. Obviously, it needs to be bigger. And we need to rotate this around a bit. All right. Maybe something about like that. Control 0. So I know that I'm not going to be able to do a perfect job with how this works, but we're kind of in the right ballpark here. Let me go ahead and use my selection here, my plan view, and I'm going to select everything outside, and then we'll add a layer mask on this layer. There it is, so that it's cut out. We'll drop this down, turn that off. And so we can see we've got shadows. I'd like to add some tree shadows if I can, because I think that would help. This view doesn't have the best shadowing, so to speak. So I think we should probably add a little bit. I can do that on a new layer. And it would be helpful to have some tree silhouettes. So I'll do a search, tree. If I spelled it correctly. Tree silhouette. Something like that'll work. Copy it. And let me paste it. All right. So let me go ahead and open that up in Photoshop. And I'm going to go to File Open instead of File Place because I want to be able to cut out just the tree. And so I'm going to do a select. We go to Select, Color Range. I'm going to pick just the black. Go ahead and say OK, so I get just that. And I'm going to deselect, so I'll hold down Alt to deselect everything except for maybe that right there. There. I'm going to press Control-C or Edit, Copy. And then I'm going to drop it into this. I'll go to Edit, Paste. I get the little silhouette of the tree here. We're going to change the blending mode on this to multiply, so we're seeing through it. Okay. Then I need to do some transformations. So let me go ahead and move this, maybe to about like that. I need to rotate this a little bit. So let me go to Edit, free transform. We'll rotate that a bit so that it's being cast there-ish. About like that. I need to skew it a little bit so that it fits a little bit with the view that I'm working on. So let's go to transform. Let's go to skew. I'm going to pull this out a little bit. That, and actually it needs to be a lot bigger. So let me go to scale again. Drag that out a little bit. And again, I'm showing you this just so that you can see the technique, right? It's a lot like we used to do with the shadows of the people in perspective. So I'm letting this match up a little bit with the scene. It probably is too dark right now, and obviously I've got to cut part of it out. So let me make a transformation of this layer. So let me go to select, color range. Once again, we can select the color range of that particular object there. Oops. Let me turn everything off so I'm not working on anything but this. And actually, let's just do the transformation after the fact. I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let's do a trying to think what would be. Let's do a Hue and Saturation adjustment. Let's lighten that up a little bit. And again, I want that to apply just to the shadows layer, so I'll press Control-Alt-G there. And that's again on multiply. Let's go ahead and turn back on the ground, and we can see that now it's casting the shadow similar to the way the building was. Obviously, I need to cut that part of the shadow out. So let's go back to my building. There it is. We select the outside. Oops. Select the outside here. There it is. I'm going to select inverse. I'll press delete. Oops. That was not what I wanted. I'm going to switch my layer to the shadow there. Press delete, and now that goes away. I probably need to do a little bit more work, and I can use the eraser tool to do this. And again, on this layer, to get rid of part of that trunk. So let me go to the eraser here. We need to get rid of a little bit there, like that. That one there probably needs to extend down somewhere to be tied into something, but you guys get the idea, right? I could probably just eliminate that stem a little bit like that, and you can see that it doesn't take too much. However, if you start to look at that in conjunction with my building, it's starting to feel like it all belongs in the same scene. Right? Likewise, maybe I need to add some shadows elsewhere in here. So a few more, and I can again work on my shadows layer here with a little bit of a paintbrush, right? And I could, fake in some of the shadows, by darkening little bits in here, something like that. Something like that. One of the keys is not to darken the trees, but to darken the ground in between the trees. Right, so we could go in and we could very carefully kind of adjust the ground a little bit so that we'd have some shadows where this stuff would fill in. Right, you get the idea. Okay? So after we have this, I think my background is still a little bit strong. So let's take that and let's adjust that down so that it has a little bit less impact or a little bit less punch. After I've done that, I feel like the shadows might have a little bit too much punch too. So there would be a good time to do a dodge and burn layer on the shadows. So I'll go to Layer, New Layer. We'll call this dodge and burn. I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I could start to lighten up, using the dodge tool, the edges of the shadows a bit. Here I am making mistakes with my layers. Layer, New, Layer, Dodge and Burn. And my Mode is going to be in overlay, fill with neutral 50% gray. That's what I was after. And now we can lighten up the edges of those shadows just a little bit. Soften them up. Like so. Now, it is applying to everything right now, which is something I don't want to have happen. So I'm going to make sure that this ties directly to the shadows layer. So Control-Alt-G will cause that to go directly to the shadows layer. And then we can kind of work these together. Notice that I was able to blend those shadows so that they weren't too contrasty there, etc. Okay? So from here, it's just a matter of kind of finalizing and working through. I'll turn back on my floor plans. I'll turn back on my airbrush and my pen gray. I'll press Control-0 so we can see everything. Now I have a plan that's been integrated into a building site. These shadows turned out kind of ugly, so they probably need a little bit of more post-processing. I could do some dodging and some burning on those shadows to kind of enhance them a bit, and some darkening, but you guys get the idea. Okay? So I'll go ahead and go to File, Save for Web, and we'll save this version for the web, and then you'll post that as your exercise for today. Okay? Are there any questions? No, again, it's a bit on the repetitive side. And we'll go through and do sections next class.